Hello everybody, welcome to the first webinar of the Lancet Youth Commission on Essential Medicines Policies. We are waiting for more people to try to log in, but I think we should begin right now because we have a lot prepared to show you today. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Today we have quite an interesting mix of audience around the world. It is really exciting to see all of you here. My name is Sam Lee Wing Sum. I'm one of the Youth Commission of the Lancet Youth Commission on Essential Medicine Policies, and this is the outline of the webinar today. So first of all, we will have Christine and Jordan, who are also the Youth Commissioners of YCEMP, to give you an overview of the report of the Youth Commission. And then we are very honored to have Professor Hans Hogerzeil, who will present the Lancet Commission, or we can call it the Primary Commission. And then later we will have the UN High-Level Panel report outline, and then also to highlight what young people can do in order to advance the access to medicine agenda. And then later we will have some ideas about how to engage more young people on the way forward. In the end, we will have some discussion and question and answer. So a little bit of house rule. In our last part of discussion and Q&A, you will be able to speak, and you just let us know, and then we'll try to unmute your microphone. Or alternatively, you can just comment or ask question anytime during the webinar via the chat box. So let us begin by looking at how the Lancet Youth Commission was born. This Lancet Youth Commission was actually the second time in history. The first Lancet Commission actually was on the topic of global health governance for health, which happened in 2012 and 13. And as Lancet convened a commission with a group of international experts on essential medicine policies in November 2014. A group of young people, most of them from a student organization called Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, UAEM, had the idea of having a youth commission that goes along the primary commission. We thought it is really important because this important global health issue really need some sort of youth perspective. And there was a lot of interest from both the Lancet Commission, the primary commission, and the Lancet itself. So we were very happy to begin the selection process, and we actually received over 200 applicants from all over the world. And in the end, we have 17 youth commissioners selected and 2 secretariats with a balance in gender as well as geographical distribution. So the Lancet Youth Commission has been in action in the past year, and our work basically came to near the end as we released our report just now. And then we also have the presentation on the 8th of November. So the Lancet Youth Commission is comprised of 17 commissioners around the world. We are happy to be funded by the Norwegian Forum for Global Health Research, NORAD, and the University of Bergen. In case you missed it, the primary commission actually released their report on November the 8th in London, and right now the Lancet has already released their special issue on essential medicine, which we highly recommend you to read. So without further ado, I think I'll pass the time to Jordan and Christine, who are the Youth Commission, and they will give you the overview of our report. And if there's any question or comments, feel free to type it in the chat box. So Christine and Jordan, the floor is yours.
So thank you so much. My name is Christine Unare. I'm a Norwegian medical doctor currently pursuing my PhD at the University of Bergen in Norway. And together with Jordan, I will give you some introduction to our report and our view as the Lancet Commission. This report is the view of 17 commissioners, which we think and hope represents a view for the future about how we imagine that essential medicines can be a reality for everyone, looking 20 years ahead. And I will, we hope to discuss our recommendations and principles with you today. And I think, as Sam brought up in the introduction, we're very glad that you are attending this seminar today, and we also think it's very crucial that young people with different backgrounds and organizations and motivations continue to play a role in shaping the Access to Medicines agenda. So I just posted the link to the YCEMP report, or our report, in the chat, where you both find our full report and executive summary of what we are recommending for a different future. It's quite long, it's 70 pages, so condensing that into a 20 minutes presentation is a challenge by itself, and we will not have time to go into all of that today. I know you are all busy people, so maybe you don't have time to listen in, to read the full report, but we hope that you will have a look at the executive summary, which summarizes our 4 main recommendations, and also on the last pages of the report you will see some key points for action and also stakeholders that we think are relevant to target. Next slide. Sam, can you add us to the next slide?
There might be some time delay when you see the slides, so I already clicked to the next slide. So, Christine, can you see it?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So we wanted to start with the definition of essential medicines and go back to the definition made by the World Health Organization. So essential medicines are those that satisfy the priority healthcare needs of the population. They are selected with due regard to public health relevance, evidence and efficacy and safety, and comparative cost effectiveness. Essential medicines are intended to be available within the context of functioning health systems at all times in adequate amounts in the appropriate dosage forms with assured quality and adequate information, and at the price the individual and the community can afford. The implementation of the concept of essential medicines is intended to be flexible and adaptable to many different situations, and exactly which medicines that are regarded as essential remains a national responsibility. So when we look at the concept of essential medicines, I know that people attending this call probably have interest more in some parts of this, like the affordability or the quality and so on. But it also shows that it's quite broad and many areas that we have to work on. And I also think that in our report we discuss recommendations that link to many of those issues. And addressing essential medicines, of course, means addressing the problem and challenge from many angles. And then we have also added some of the stakeholders that play a crucial role shaping the essential medicines policy agenda. Researchers, civil society, commissions such as the Lancet Commission, policymakers, there's people from NGOs such as MSF, Doctors Without Borders, or other stakeholders. So there's a range of actors who are involved in this issue. We also highlighted youth because we are a youth commission, and we argue that the youth perspective is relevant. And I think also historically you can look at young people and civil society as important shapers of the agenda. But that this slides show, we wanted to highlight why youth perspective matters in particular for essential medicines policies. And within the Commission we've had a forward-looking vision. We look towards 2035 and try to imagine what kind of healthcare system we think that we need. So we think that current efforts towards securing access to essential medicines for everyone who need it, they're good, but more needs to be done. And we have to move from a country-by-country or a drug-by-drug initiatives to towards more systematic change. And in the Commission, we argue that access to medicines, the problem, is a shared global challenge. So it's no longer a problem that is only relevant in a low-income setting. It's a problem that affects all of us and also will affect patients in all countries when we look ahead. And we think that it's important to acknowledge that and to use that opportunity. And that's why also our focus in the report has been on global solutions. I also wanted to highlight some of the key aspects or key principles of our work. We want to improve equity. We want to have our recommendations rooted in securing and protecting human rights, human right to health, human right to science. And in addition to that, we think that to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, essential medicines will be a crucial part. And the Lancet report that was published November 8 shows very clearly that essential medicines is key to deliver on universal health coverage. Last, we do talk about accountability. We have published some of our vision, a new vision for essential medicines. Here you can see two of the pieces that our comment that was published last week, Youth Demand Action, and also a comment in the Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology talking about that young people have a new vision for essential medicines. I'll now go through the recommendations. There are 4 main areas to be covered with 18 specific action points that are described in our report. And from each of these 8 action points, you can also find a key decision maker you could target or an audience where this recommendation is relevant from. So I will hand over to Jordan, who will give us the presentation of the first 2 recommendations of the report, and then I will cover the last 2.
Thank you, Christine. Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Jarvis. Just briefly, I'm a member of the Youth Commission, and I work in the field of non-communicable diseases and access to medicines. I'm coming to you today from Boston, so it's morning here. So to dive into our first 2 recommendations. Our first recommendation centers really on the basics of what does an essential medicine mean and how are those selected and defined, or defined and selected then within countries. So you might be familiar with the WHO model list of essential medicines that is updated every 2 years. And as the name implies, really is a model list that serves a normative function for countries to then apply in their own countries based on disease burden and priorities in countries. And so we took a lens on national essential medicines lists within this first recommendation, and thinking about how we can leverage those lists to improve access and affordability of medicines. Breaking it down into the specific action points here is that we recommend that all countries, irrespective of income levels, as Christina said, really highlighting this as a shared global challenge, adopt national essential medicines lists which reflect population health needs and clinical best practices, and that these national essential medicines lists should be separate from and used in conjunction with national procurement or reimbursement lists or programs. And really throughout our report we highlight the need for transparency and accountability, which I'm sure will be mentioned several times throughout this webinar. And this recommendation to keep these lists separate is really to highlight then within countries sort of the difference between what is essential or what is deemed essential in that setting and what is actually available. So our recommendation 1.2 is that the selection of medicines then on these lists be governed by transparent operating processes that incorporate evidence-based standards and utilize participatory processes involving diverse stakeholders, so including youth. What is great about the WHO model list of essential medicines is that anyone can submit a proposal for a medicine to be added or deleted. And so many young people have actually been involved in those processes. And we would like to see the same happening at the country level, where there's a transparent process of selecting medicines. Recommendation 1.3 is to adopt that all countries adopt policies stating that when a medicine is deemed essential, it will be made available and accessible with concrete steps outlined taken to realize access. And finally, building on the, again, on the accountability, need for accountability, is that an essential medicine scorecard be developed and implemented to improve transparency around and monitor progress on the realization of these national essential medicines lists. And so within our report, we have a draft, a scorecard of what something might look like very broadly that can be used and taken up by others within this space. Ideally outside of a member state-driven organization to really build that accountability. So we'll move on to the second set of recommendations. If you can switch to the next slide. And just briefly, so for each of these 4 blocks of recommendations, we will have separate webinars coming up, which Sam will tell you a little bit more about, and those will be announced. So to dive more into detail into each of these topics, if there's something that you're particularly interested in, you will have the opportunity to discuss that further with us. So the second recommendation is on enabling global reform, cooperation, and consensus to ensure access to essential medicines. And so this is a big group of really important action points. Starting with that, we recommend that a United Nations Interagency Task Force on Access to Medicines be created to ensure policy coherence and to improve access to medicines across all disease areas and across UN agencies. So models like UNAIDS and other UN interagency task forces provide good examples of how effective this can be. And we think that you know, instead of each disease group fighting their own fight, we really need to come together a bit more within the UN context. Our recommendation 2.2 is that the proposed interagency task force, just stated, bring together stakeholders to reach agreements around establishing a new and more equitable system to protect and balance innovators and patient rights. So here, this is in relation to patents, and you can dive into this a little bit more detail within our report, as with all of these recommendations. The 2.3 is that looking at trade agreements. So many of us are really worried about trading away access to essential medicines within trade and investment agreements. And so our recommendation here in that context is that the trilateral cooperation mechanism, which is between the WHO, the World Trade Organization, and the World Intellectual Property Organization, be utilized to protect essential medicines within free trade agreements. And just briefly, these could be this body could be well placed to address the issue of form shifting and to convene stakeholders to draft best practices template and guidance for intellectual property provisions within free trade agreements. So moving on to the next recommendation is to that research and development models are implemented that incentivize innovation based on global health need and facilitate access to knowledge and global goods from basic research through to the delivery of products. And so we envision this new system incorporating or requiring that knowledge be considered a global public good to start, and that a delinked research and development system be created. So when research and development is delinked, the end price of the product is not connected to the costs of developing that product. And finally, as part of that is a global financing mechanism that be implemented to support research and development according to global health needs. So in 2.5, our recommendation is that technical assistance be provided to public research institutions to facilitate access to technologies developed in these institutions. So for those of you who are part of University's Ally for Essential Medicines, you're surely familiar with this. And really what we're asking for here is the provision of technical support to university tech transfer offices. And these are, for those not familiar, are specific offices within universities that ensure the transfer of this knowledge to the marketplace by licensing technology or other methods of commercialization. And really this to share best practices for humanitarian licensing, patented discoveries, and other licensing approaches that prioritize access globally. And finally, within this recommendation 2.5, also to create leadership around international norms whereby the success of research team isn't really just based on the number of patents obtained, but rather the accessibility and effectiveness of innovations, especially within low and middle income countries. And finally, within this section of 2.6, we recommend that steps be taken to adopt a consensus definition of counterfeit medicines as well as generic medicines as soon as practicable. So, and this will actually, discussion will be happening in the coming weeks, as some of you might know. And we found this really a really important step to make sure that we're differentiating counterfeit and generic medicines to ensure access, because generic medicines are such an important component to promote access to essential medicines. So I'll hand it off to Christine for the next set of recommendations.
Thank you, Jordan, for giving such a comprehensive overview of the many recommendations that we have, and now there will be some more. I think Jordan highlighted very well how the current system is set up in a way that to address some of these global challenges, we also need to look at global solutions and global cooperation. But what we also identified in our work was that we think regional and cross-country cooperation is key to achieve accessible and affordable and appropriate use of medicines. And when we look towards 2035, we think that it's necessary and crucial to collaborate. And in the current discussion about universal health coverage, governments and health agencies have to make important decisions. And we argue that these should be evidence-based and take global context into consideration. And in that process, health technology assessment can be a very useful tool. And we argue that through regional or cross-country collaboration, it's possible to do that in a better way than collaborate on health technology assessments, but also in terms of regulatory authorities, that collaborating on the information that we have can be a way to support better decision making. And lastly, we also call for or suggest that there should be pooling mechanisms to lower the costs of new drugs. Next slide. So our last recommendation is on translation of essential medicines policies into practice, because it doesn't really matter before it reaches the final users. Or we can have many good thoughts early in the pipeline, but if they're not made accessible or the policies are not implemented, then we're left with little action. So in this chapter we suggest a range of 5 recommendations that addresses practices at the country level. The first one is that we call for more study on local and regional production of medicines. A lot of our commissioners have also brought attention to the health workforce and how health workforce play a crucial role in delivery of essential medicines. Do health workers have knowledge? Do they have the opportunity to implement what is being suggested? But also to how non-professional healthcare workers and patients have enough information about the drugs that they have and the safety of the drugs. So healthcare workforce and health workforce literacy is key, and this can also be implemented in the curricula of medical students or pharmacists, of nurses, and so on. Our last 2 recommendations address the key issue of transparency and accountability, and we call for transparency in costs, transparency in the research cost and development cost and production cost. As we all know, there are different estimates out there, and we argue that these should be made available in line with what others also have recommended. Additionally, we call upon government to make sure that prices are shared, so that countries have the opportunity to know what others are paying and also make available themselves what they are paying. And we think that in the current landscape of discussions of extremely highly priced drugs, it's important that this becomes available. So we've now thrown 4 main recommendations at you and 18 bullet points of more information, and I think that some of this might have been too technical, some would say, but we also wanted to highlight some of the scope and broad of our work. Can you go to next slide? So I think here are some front pages. To the left you see the report of the Lancet Commission that Professor Hogerzeil will tell you more about. You see the high-level panel on access to medicines, which is a UN-led panel, and then you see our report. This is just 3 reports, and for those of you who have worked in access to medicines for a while, you know that there are many other reports. This week there is a lot of attention given to antimicrobial resistance. We've seen the CWG reports. There has been many reports on access to medicines, and what we would like to highlight as the Youth Commission is that we think that given all the knowledge we have on what to do, the next step is really about moving forward on that and making sure that what is recommended is actually turned into practice. And I think that we as youth and also all others have not only a responsibility but also an opportunity to make sure that that happens. And I think the current momentum that is building up, because this is being recognized as a global problem, is something that we have to make use of. What we have discussed within the Commission is that we think that when we talk about essential medicines or access to medicines, it's sometimes discussions that go on within our movement, but we also need to reach out to the many other actors who are involved, because we know that access to medicines is not only a health issue or a biomedical issue. It is really being shaped by trade, by laws, by how policies are set up and implemented. These issues are relevant for people working on children's health or psychiatry or a health system more broadly. So I think we really have to make sure that these recommendations are heard by others, and the reports or their summaries are read also by others, and we have to to discuss the recommendations from the different reports and really make sure that we go from what we recommend to see that it's implemented and taken into plans and implementation. So I think on that note, I will say that we have presented some of what we think is important in our report. We hope you will read parts of it or the whole of it, but as I just said, we think it's really crucial that we at this point all make sure that we move forward and that we as young people in particular have a responsibility and obligation to hold actors accountable, to engage with politicians, to engage with people at your university, to talk to civil society, or making sure that we really deliver on what is being recommended.
Thank you, Christine and Jordan. That is a very great overview of the different aspects of access to medicine. And I just want to quote Sir Richard Horton during the launch in London. He said, you know, the whole thing is very complex with many components and many discussions. And again, we hope that the Youth Commission covers at least the most important opportunity that young people can act upon. So is there any burning question or immediate comments following this discussion? So if you have, just feel free to type it in the chat box. If no immediate response, I think it is okay. We still have some time for discussion and Q&A at the end of the webinar. I think we should move on to our next part. We are very honored to have Professor Hans Hogerzeil, who is a professor of global health at Groningen University. He was the director for essential medicine and pharmaceutical policies at WHO, World Health Organization, in the year 2008 and 2011. He was also the co-chair of the Lancet Commission on Essential Medicine Policy and also a great supporter to the Youth Commission. Well, I do realize there's a question from one of the participants, so let me save that to our later section. And I think I should pass the time to Professor Hans Hogerzeil.
All right. Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everybody. It's a great pleasure to me to speak to all of you and to participate in the discussion. And unless I hear otherwise, I suppose you can hear me properly. I've always been very much in support of the Youth Commission. I really thought that was such a good opportunity and such a good opportunity for all of us to have a parallel process to this big Lancet Commission, which took nearly 3 years. And also because I believe, as I say to my own students always, they are your sustainable development goals. They were my Millennium Development Goals, that was my generation. But the sustainable development goals, that's your generation. Let me briefly start by explaining the relation between the three reports. We have the Lancet report, we have the Youth Commission report, and we have the UN High Level Panel report. Well, the Lancet and the Youth Commission, I think, is clear. They started more or less at the same time, and they cover the whole area of access to essential medicines. And both were independent and free to choose their topics. And I think they were independent because for a long time, none of the two commissions knew what the other one was doing, and that was intentional. So there, you can say there are two independent reports on the same topic and with the same scope. And then you have the UN High Level Panel report, which came out in September 2016, and we'll hear about it later. But there we should realize that the UN High Level Panel report is specifically on the relation between innovation and access. So the high cost of research and things like that. We'll hear about it later, but that's focusing on that topic. So it's limited in scope, while the Lancet report, as you will see very soon, covers the full range of 5 or 6 main topics. Secondly, the Lancet report was written by very independent people, academics who had no relation to government or industry, and were largely people who knew about medicines and who knew how to look at data. And then they could conclude independently. The UN high-level report was much more a stakeholder report with experts representing different sides and different stakeholders. And there you can see for let me say people who can read between the lines, you can see many what I would call scars of compromise, where you can see that not such tough language has been used simply because there were so many parties, each with their own opinions. And the last difference between the Lancet report and the UN high-level report is that the Lancet report focuses very much on evidence, has spent a lot of time in collecting evidence for all the recommendations. So it's very much evidence-based, data-based, while the UN high-level report, in my opinion, is more, as I said, stakeholder-based and opinion-based. Both are good, but I think it's good to realize these differences. Let's now go to the to our presentation, and that can go rather quickly. You see here, of course, that the main message here of slide number 2 is that universal health coverage demands essential medicines, and you find the text of the Sustainable Development Goals. That's easy. Next slide, please. And in the next slide, you can see that slide number 3, which are the 5 key challenges. So this is what in our commission we really saw as the main problems. So it was financing for medicine, pricing and affordability, quality use, developing missing essential medicines, and cross-cutting a measuring progress. These are the important components of our project. What you should realize is there are a few topics that we have not touched. And for example, we have really not said much about supply systems. And the reason was that there are so many other units and groups and working on supply issues which we thought was rather technical and not so much political. And there's a lot of information available. We didn't think that we would add much. And also on this issue which you have touched in the Youth Commission on counterfeits and that sort of thing, we also decided not really to go into that. There's such a huge process going on. We did not really think that as a Commission we could add more to that than what we have done. So that's just for you to know a few things we choose not to touch. But for the rest, I think this is rather a wide scope in which also the recommendations of the UN high-level panel can be placed. And those people that don't like the outcome of the UN High Panel, sort of saying, oh, but patents is not a problem, or research is not a problem, there's so many other issues, that's okay. So then these people who say that would read our report, and then they can see where the big thing fits in. Next slide, please. So then we should, to make it easy for all of you who are not going to read a 74-page report, and I see now that on your slide some of it some of the text has dropped off. But I try to help you by saying, so what's new? What's new in the Lancet report? And the first thing that's new is that although some of the recommendations are new, but not all of them are. Like also in the Youth Commission, some things are new and some are not. But in any case, there's a lot of new evidence for many effective interventions. So we may be recommending things that have been recommended before, but it is an absolute update. Are you still there? Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Okay, I see that.
We just got a little some of the screen, that's all.
Very good. Sorry, I lost the slide. No problem. So there's much evidence for effective interventions. Secondly, a strong message in our report is that there are a strong responsibility for governments, that the free market will not solve it. Then the third one is that in section number 1, we have the first ever global estimate of the cost of 201 essential medicines for all people in low and middle income countries. A surprising estimate has never been done before, and it shows basically that so many people in so many countries simply don't have enough money, while globally there is enough money. Then that the essential medicine concept and the concept of selection is needed and valid for all countries. All countries are now suffering from expensive essential medicines. Then what's also new is regulators. A lot of new technology has been presented for the medicine regulation and quality control, but what is new is a set of performance indicators for medicine regulators. The whole idea that not only should the general public and stakeholders help the regulators, but also that they should, as they are a public body, they should really be held accountable for what they're doing. And there's a suggested way, which is like a wish list. What should they do, and how can we verify that they're actually doing it? Now, then on the R&D, you can say it's the same. Our recommendations are a little stronger, go a little further than the UN high-level panel, but in any case, they are much more evidence-based. So there's strong evidence can be, you should read our report if you really want to get more evidence on this whole discussion. And then final section is a proposal for independent monitoring of the performance of governments through 24 core indicators. And again, the idea is that governments are so important, their role is so important that we should really establish some sort of independent mechanism. The model there has been this idea that you have for safe motherhood and mother and child, so the countdown, and there are sort of with the Lancet and I think with the Gates Foundation and the Metrics Institute, they have together started a sort of global mechanism to measure performance in each of the countries, sort of working towards targets and making it clear. That's in line with what WHO Director General Margaret Chan always said, what gets measured gets done. So that's why also in our report I think accountability is really an important issue. So this is the main message. Let's quickly flip through the slides, but I'm not going to comment on each of them. So next slide please. Yeah, this is an important one. Here you see what is the actual pharmaceutical expenditure. So on the right hand, on the horizontal axis, you see basically the expenditure on health. On the vertical, you see the dollars per capita per year spent on medicines. And then the horizontal line, this yellow line, is the minimum threshold of $13. That's the minimum you need. And now you see that 3/4 of the low-income countries are below that threshold. There is simply not enough money in their country to spend even the basic package of medicines. Next one. There you see it for low middle-income countries. There you see that most of them are above it, as you can see, and the scales are different. The yellow line is at the same level, but still you can say that about 1/4 of low middle-income countries are also below it. So there is in total about 1 in 5 countries is below the absolute minimum when we talk about a minimum package of essential medicines. Next one. There you can see, let's see what comes, the next one. Yeah, these are the recommendations. So we talk about financing, we talk about reducing the amount of out-of-pocket spending and to invest in the capacity to track expenditure. It was very difficult to find the information, so we want countries to really spend some time and effort in collecting information. And the last one is a very important one, that we would say that there is enough money in the system. And this is key. The international community must fulfill its human rights obligations to support governments of low-income countries in financing a basic package of medicines for all if they are unable to do so domestically. You see, if the government spent all the money on an army or something, you can say, well, you're on your own. But if they really try and there's not enough income, then I think it's an international obligation to make that available. Or you choose to ignore these people. But I personally think there could be also a global fund for essential medicines, not just for AIDS, TB, and malaria. Next slide, please. Here you see that, well, that's the only, the next slide please, to show that affordability questions are now in every country a problem. The next slide, slide number 9, basically tells you that, and that's the main message here, that there are many ways of reducing prices. And here you see some of the chapter headings. But the key point is you have to do them all. Don't exclude anything for political reasons. And then there's a lot of technical discussions and technical reference what you can do and what other countries are doing to reduce prices. Next one please. Here you see the recommendations. I think we can click through that one again. So I move on to slide number 11. And that's basically only to make the case that when you have doctors or prescribers, they usually think that if they have written their prescription, that's finished, and then the medicine should just be there. And here we say that quality of the medicine is really important. You can read for yourself. There's a risk for the patient and a risk for society. Next slide. And this is also an important slide where we basically say what is the strategic direction of the Commission's recommendations when we talk about quality. And again, I think some of the language has fallen off the slide. But the key point is we agree with the Lancet Youth Commission, emphasis on international harmonization, and the key one is we want regulators to do something that makes sense, that adds value. So don't repeat what other countries are doing, and that's basically it. To use information, use pre-qualification, do all of that, and then, as I said, promote accountability. So the new set of performance indicators for national regulators. Next slide. Here you can see some examples, and the key message here is that when we speak about irrational use, then there's 4 kinds. There's overuse, using medicines that are not necessary, or underuse, like hypertension is very often not treated. Misuse is the wrong medicine. And inefficient use, that's the example here you can't read, is basically on insulin, where some countries are now increasingly changing basically effective human insulin for analogs, which are expensive and don't offer any benefit. So this chapter, next slide please. This chapter again gives a wonderful update on all the evidence that's available, what works, what doesn't work. It doesn't give so much news here, the recommendation. Next slide. But the main message is there's all the evidence you want to know now, what works, what doesn't work, you will find it in the Lancet. So that's really now an update on what we knew already. And it also goes next, the current slide is okay. Why did it not work? And then it gives some reasons there. Let's flip through that. And some recommendations. They are nothing new, but you can basically say they are better based on evidence. You are on a good slide now on the R&D issue. That's common to you, and this is the overlap with the UN panel. I think you can see that the problems we know had basically the medicines you want to be developed, they are not being developed. The research is led by economic considerations, and when new medicines come out, they are too expensive. Next one. The Lancet gives a lot, that's lesson number 18, lessons learned. The Lancet gives a lot of information, and that's new evidence on what has worked and what has not worked. That has really not been described elsewhere, and this is a summary of the last 5 or 10 years. If you want to know, and as I say, if you want to get the evidence, this is what you should read. Next one on 19. A very important thing which I would all of you to realize is many people say, oh, there's a market failure. The market is failing. No, the market is not failing at all. The market is very effective. The point is, we say it's a public policy failure to rely on the markets. And that's why I come back. It's very important for governments to act. Next slide. So here you see towards the global R&D framework, you see some of the recommendations. This will overlap very much with the UN report. The next one, and that one I don't think I will go into it. The report presents, as I said, 24 indicators which cover, which basically can check whether the governments are fulfilling the recommendations of the Lancet Commission. That's sort of what it is. But really using as much as possible existing indicators. You can see some of them on slides 22, 23. But using existing indicators, introducing a few more. And this is basically the setup, and Richard Horton at the launch also already alluded to it. We may now have the next step in the next few years will be that we have to create an international accountability system for governments. Are they really doing what they're supposed to do? I think I should stop here and back to the chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hans Hogerzeil. That was a really good presentation and a really nice overview of the differences and the similarities that we have in terms of the 3 reports. So I think, are there any burning questions to Professor Hans Hogerzeil? So Shiva, how about I also unmute you so you can also coordinate a little bit in terms of what question we have? So I'm just trying to
I see a question here at number 31.
Mm-hmm.
Shall I respond to a question by number attendee 31? That is, how could drug market regulators like FDA and EMA or governments improve swift market entry for generic medication? Well, there's in the Lancet is a big table what they could do. There's a long list of things. There are usually legal changes, but they can also be changes in the regulatory body. For example, you can reduce the cost of a generic registration. Or you can have what you call a BOLA provision that in the law that you can allow pharmaceutical companies already work on a generic product while still under patent, so that they can prepare themselves for the market reach. They can even submit the registration before the patent has expired. So there are things like that. Then you can also say, I would strongly say, if you have a generic, say a new generic anti-malaria or something, I would recommend then that product, the manufacturer should first get WHO pre-qualification with a standard file, and then there is ways that the WHO convenes 20, 30, 40 regulators at the same time. They all look at the same time at the same file, and then all of them know what to do, and then go home and approve it. So these are also things, so especially the pre-qualification, low fees, standard file, don't ask for any other studies in your own country, don't repeat what other countries have done, and basically assess the new medicine or the generic medicine together. These are some of the things that can be done. There are many more, and they're in a table in the Lancet. Over.
Excellent point, thank you. So I think I had the question about what civil society can do in order in implementing the recommendation. So let me ask Jordan and also Professor Hogerzeil to answer separately. So Jordan, would you like to answer the role of civil society?
Sure. So in relation to the Lancet Youth Commission report, civil society really action will be required across all of these recommendations to see their realization. And civil society obviously have a really important role to play in building accountability both nationally and internationally. So we'll require also cooperation between international civil society organizations that are focused on the processes at the UN and the WHO, as well as more civil society activity in various countries to build national accountability for governments to deliver on these improvements in access. So that's a really broad statement, and I think if you join our webinars where we dive into more detail on each of these recommendations, I think it would be really wonderful for us to all discuss specifically how we see civil society playing a role.
Thank you, Jordan. Professor Hogerzeil, how can civil society help implement your recommendations?
Well, I think civil society has a strong role in demanding accountability. I think that should be it. It would be too. I, as WHO, have worked a lot with what I would call a well-informed civil society. Groups like MSF, like Health Action International, YCEMP, and when we say the general public or civil society, that doesn't mean necessarily only the man in the street. That can be very highly informed people, can be academics, etc. And I think we have good experiences with that. So they can either come with alternative solutions, or they can just demand their public right for information, for example. They can be a mosquito in the neck of the industry, of the government, by asking for specific information. And I think they should, as young people, also at the university level, should ask their professors. They should basically be very clear in what they want and speak out, speak out, speak out. If you don't ask, you don't get.
Thank you. There's a question about traditional medicine. So just a little bit. So the Youth Commission did try to consider this, but what we discussed is that because traditional medicine faces different challenges. For example, it's a little bit more difficult to do research on a clinical efficacy, and also it's also quite new. And in terms of the regulation, a lot of countries are still trying to develop the regulatory framework. So, but I would like to hand this question to Professor Hogerzeil again. So, especially in Asia and Africa, a lot of people are using traditional medicine. Is there any discussion about having traditional medicine on the essential medicine list before?
Well, there are several countries that have traditional medicines on their essential medicines list. Take China. It has, I think, the basic list, essential medicines list, has about 160 what you call Western or allopathic medicines, and I think about 160 components to make essential components to make the most common traditional remedy mixtures, etc. So there are examples. There's no WHO list, but there is a WHO what you call a formulary, where of all the known, or not all, but many known traditional remedies, first of all, the nomenclature has been sorted out, so the biological, which plant actually are we talking about, and then also what is known in classical literature, what is known in folk or current, let me say, practical use, and what are the indications which have actually been supported by biomedical research. So there's at least 3 volumes, and I can really recommend that. So that is that. And then there's also WHO information on advice to governments how to regulate traditional medicines. And I agree that proving the efficacy in a biomedical sense is very often difficult. And some people will say that will never be possible because that's not the intention. And I can see that. But there are, at the same time, there are certain things you can, for safety, it can be much more clear. And to give you just an example, you can say, basically say, you can put a maximum to toxic materials. I mean, the traditional medicine should not kill the patient. So you want maximum contents of certain heavy metals, for example, you can regulate that. Another common thing is that, especially in some continents, you have traditional medicine which are actually mixed with allopathic medicine. So you have a traditional herbal ointment, and they put corticosteroids in it, or tetracycline. Now, so that's also, you can solve that by regulation and saying, the moment traditional medicine contains an allopathic medicine, it becomes an allopathic medicine and is subject to the normal registration. So there's a lot of material available, and also good examples, like especially Australia, for example, has a good regulatory approach to traditional medicine. Over.
Thank you. So there's one question about public institutes assistance, but let me put that question to the last part of this webinar. And there's a question about medicine pricing. Whether it's possible to regulate the markup, and whether there's any country example who are successful. Professor Hogerzeil, I wonder if you would like to answer this question.
I can give a short answer because I think we're running out of time. So the question on medicine pricing, regulating markups, the answer is yes. You can regulate the wholesale margin, you can regulate the retail margin, you can actually eliminate the retail margin, for example, by putting a 0 markup and changing it with a dispensing fee, so it's a fixed fee per medicine, not related to the price of the medicine. There are many countries who have done that. There's a lot of information from the WHO Collaborating Center on pricing and pricing regulation in Austria. So there's a collaborative center in Vienna, and the PPRI, pharmaceutical pricing and reimbursement information. So there's a lot, and there's many countries in Europe do that. Over.
Thank you very much. So sorry if we have missed your question, but we will try to address those in the end of the webinar. But for the interest of time, I think we should go to the next very interesting part of our presentation. Again, Jordan, may I hand over to you to present on the UN high-level panel.
Sure. And so Dr. Hogerzeil introduced the panel briefly as well. But just to give a brief overview to highlight the UNHLP is that it was convened by the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in December 2015 to address the imbalance between human rights, public health, intellectual property rights, and trade policies. Next slide, please. So, and as Dr. Hogerzeil mentioned, this is really stakeholder-based, so included representatives from civil society, academia, industry, and government, as well as an expert advisory group that supported the panel outcomes. So in order to arrive at its recommendations, the high-level panel solicited proposals quite widely and received over 180 submissions. And the Lancet Youth Commission submitted 2 from our group to this. And these submissions all form the basis of the report. Next. So to give you an overview of some of the outcomes briefly, is that, again, it's really focused on intellectual property and patents. And some of some of the takeaways we have gotten here is to respect and strengthen the legal landscape. So often free trade agreements contain provisions that really go beyond the minimum standards for intellectual property protections on medicines and health technologies. And we briefly alluded to this in some of the second set of recommendations that I presented, that we're increasingly seeing forum shifting of these trade agreements out of the World Trade Organization and taking the shape of bilateral and multilateral free trade agreements. And so the report highlights sort of the need to protect countries' legally, and that countries that use international agreements to promote access to health technologies should be protected, and that others that use trade agreements to hinder access should face punitive measures. So, for example, urging the World Trade Organization Secretariat to consider formal reports of wrongdoing during trade policy review of members, such that members can register complaints of political and economic pressure and take punitive measures against offenders. So the second outcome, sort of big picture to highlight, is the implementation of alternative models of funding research and development. So similar to ours, the other two reports, this suggests the delinkage model, where the end price is delinked from the cost of research and development. And this awards intellectual property for genuine innovation. And by supplementing the existing market-driven system with innovative financing mechanisms, we can increase investment in needed technologies. Next slide. So the next outcome here is really a focus on transparency, and again, that's where it aligns with some of our report as well. And the recommendation is that all manufacturers and distributors disclose the costs of producing and dispensing their products. So really pushing for transparent pricing. Public research and development funders should require that all knowledge generated also from such research be made freely and widely available. The next outcome here is to recommend an increase in investment. So really focusing on where are the gaps, and where do we need to increase in investment to continue to promote innovations that improve quality and length of life. Finally, on accountability. So private biomedical companies involved in innovation, here, for example, just one example, are promoted to report annually on actions they've taken to promote access to health technologies. And another specific aspect is that WHO should establish and maintain a database of the prices of patented generic and biosimilar medicines in countries where they're registered. So how can we really, again, promote a framework of accountability to governments as well as private industry, and as well as civil society, those delivering those medicines. So that's, but here really focused also on industry accountability. So that's the overview of this quickly, and again, we didn't have anything to do other than our submissions to this UN high-level panel, so I'm definitely not representing them in any way here. But we wanted to briefly highlight where the overlaps are in our report and the UN high-level panel report. Again, on respecting and strengthening the legal landscape, is thinking about national essential medicines lists and providing more of a policy framework to enable access, implementing models for R&D funding, again, promoting the idea of delinkage, the transparency paradigm shift, that first of all, within countries, there would be greater transparency in the selection of these medicines, but then also the steps to work toward access via a scorecard, having more accountability, and that feeding into the last recommendation as well. Increased investment, that's also something where there's overlap in terms of the provision of technical resources for public institutions to facilitate access, and regional pooling mechanisms is another thing we suggest that countries do sort of regionally or across countries if they have sort of similar economies and other similar aspects. And finally, the accountability component through the Interagency Task Force on Access to Medicine and support on free trade agreements as well through the trilateral cooperation mechanism. So I'm going to end it there with this overview of the UN high-level panel report and hand it off to Sam.
Thank you very much, Jordan, and also thank our Youth Commissioner Reshma for preparing the slides. It's such a great overview and comparison between the two. So next, I would like to go very quickly through what exactly we as young people can do in advancing this A2M agenda now that the 3 reports are released. So first of all, just a little bit of commercial time. We have upcoming webinars, and the next one is scheduled in late November to early December. The details will be announced very soon. Will be on WHO Essential Medicine list. We'll look into why and how it was created and what changes it has experienced in the past year, especially in the past year, and then what is the future and how can we ensure that at the national level there's accountability in terms of using the essential medicine list to ensure access. And in terms of side publication and social media, the Youth Commission will continue to try to engage as many people as possible. And then the next thing, this is something that I especially feel very excited about, is that we also need to thank the UN Major Group for Children and Youth, which is a space, official space mandated by the UN Assembly to engage young people. It is one of the 9 major groups within the UN. So anyone under the age of 35 can join. Whether you can join either as a person or as an institution, and then you will have the opportunity to represent young people and to be present in all the UN high-level events and processes, such as the UN Habitat, disaster risk reduction. And one of the biggest heads up for everyone is that the next UN High-Level Political Forum, which is a yearly event to follow up on SDGs and to create, sort of like a platform for experience and vision sharing. And in the upcoming one in 2017 will be on a theme eradicating poverty and promoting prosperity in a changing world. In this year, the SDG number 3 on health will be reviewed, and we indeed see a lot of, potential and opportunity for youth advocacy. And of course, there's the World Health Organization Executive Board meeting and the World Health Assembly, in which the countries will continue to discuss their R&D treaty, and as well as the Global Observatory for Global R&D. There are a lot of things happening around the world in terms of international processes in WIPO, Intellectual Property Organization and World Trade Organization, and we also need your feedback and your comments about how young people can participate in all this. There are a lot of ways to engage in discussion on access to medicine at your university and at the health facilities that you are in. If you are a little bit more outcome-oriented, you can even try to conduct a research and to look into, for example, the availability and the affordability of a medicine in your neighborhood. You can also write a newspaper article discussing the problems and the potential solutions, and of course to engage in local and national policies discussions. And also a big shout out for the Access to Medicine Week by our colleagues from the Universities Allied for Essential Medicine, which is happening this week, which coincides with the Antimicrobial Resistant Awareness Week. If you're interested, do feel free to Google and to Facebook them. I can assure you very interesting perspective, and you can surely learn a lot about what young people and students can do. So the last, sort of like a statistics is that youth comprise 40% of the world's population. So I hope that through this webinar and our report, you can answer the question that yes, we can change the status quo, and then we do have the concrete ways to do it. And as Christine and Jordan say, it is time to transform what we know into what we do. So we still have some time left for discussion and question and answer. Again, if you would like to speak, to provide feedback and ask questions, you can be concise and I'll try to unmute you. So what you need to do is to indicate that in the chat box and I'll unmute you. Alternatively, you can just type the question in this chat box and we'll try to address them all. Let me put let me go back a little bit and to our first question about public institutes, about the technical assistance. So I wonder if Christine and Jordan can answer the question about that recommendation.
Yes, I can try to answer that. In our report, which is quite long, you will find a recommendation 2.5 on technical assistance to be provided to public health institutions to facilitate access to technologies developed in these institutions. So you can read more about it on page 28. But in general, we call upon universities to have a role in this, as they have to facilitate that this happens at the local level, where you need to make sure that university policies and also practices are in line with this, but also at a more national level, what kind of legislation and mechanisms for publicly funded research are in place to facilitate that research, and research that ends up being a potential end products actually are made available. So I think there are examples from the work of Universities Allied for Essential Medicines being implemented at different universities, primarily in Europe and Northern America, but also happening in other places where you see that licensing policies can be adjusted. But I think also we have discussed within the Commission that national governments have a role to play here, and I think the recent discussion and public debate about that governments pay for research twice doesn't make sense. And as governments, you can make legislation and processes that take these concerns into account. There has also been discussions within technology transfer organizations and institutions that to actually implement and make sure that this happens, they also might need technical advance to make this happen. As we know today, that when a new discovery is going into the process of being developed into a new drug, it's very long and very complicated, and also making sure that the ownership stays in the public is something that demands technical assistance. So we would say that we call upon universities, on governments, and also on technical agencies to support that happens.
Thank you, Christine. So I think Professor Hogerzeil actually has a question for the Youth Commission. Professor Hogerzeil?
Yes, thank you. Actually, it's two questions, but I'll put them in one go. And the first one is, I have seen so many recommendations in your report, and I think they're good, they're fine, and especially when you see them in summary, that's good. But the next step is, okay, you may, if you want to continue working on this, you may want to add more sort of, let me say, creative power to how to do it. Let me give you a very concrete example. You say that, well, you are not so happy that there is no good international definition on counterfeit or substandard medicines and generics, and it's okay to say, well, okay, we don't like it that there is no a good definition. Then I would say, but then start making your own definition. Propose something. You see what I mean? And so make it more concrete. There would be other ones, and to give you some ideas about how you could possibly be concrete. I've got the two following things. You mentioned, for example, one of your recommendations is to help to disseminate, let me say, research knowledge in universities. And I was actually thinking, you may, as a Youth Commission or as a UAM, you may want to help use your power of all the students in all these different universities, but they may not know what to do or how to do it. So in one way or another, do some little project where you describe what has been done by some groups where you can say this was successful. In some universities, I think, have done quite well. The students have done well. And write it down or translate that into some sort of a small, very small, let me say, guideline for new students how to do that. Tell them what has been done and give them either suggestions or scenarios what they could do. The same thing applies to when you say, well, we need better training of professionals, and that has been an early discussion point in Youth Commission as well. I mean, so better training in essential medicines or access issues, equity issues. And again there, you may want to either describe some good experiences from some universities, but especially translate that in a short guideline for students, how to act, let me say, methods and priorities for action. So I think most universities are rather sensitive when students ask for certain topics. So, but then you can help the students to say, now what are the key topics that we really want to be included in the curriculum? And one step further is not only just listing the topics, what are the key training materials or training methods? And what are the basic skills we want to, not only the knowledge you can get from the web, but what are the skills we want? What are the methodology, the teaching methods that we want in this specific topic of essential medicine? So these are two suggestions. So either write some sort of guideline for what students can do in asking about the R&D situation in their university, and the second one, what students can do to basically ask for better training, but ask in a positive way. Come with concrete proposals, and I think that would be very good. So that was my first question or suggestion to the Youth Commission, that makes it concrete and make use of the power that you have access to so many students, but you have to help them a little bit at the same time. And the last one is a bit of a short question, and that again is, I note in your recommendation that you are asking for accountability, and I think all the three reports do that. The Lancet report does it, the UN level report does it, and the Youth Commission does it. So there's obviously a need for accountability. And you also ask to be listed as a stakeholder, and that's very interesting. I made a private note for myself also that in future when you list the stakeholders in this whole issue, we should specifically list youth as well. Now comes the question, okay, so if the youth is a real stakeholder, then also the youth should be held accountable. And you have to think about that. And my question to you is, and that's probably a question you may want to reflect or give a provisional answer among yourselves. How will you define success by the end of 2017? How will you as a Youth Commission or as UAM, how will you define that you have done well? In other words, what sort of targets would you have by the end of 2017, and how are you going to measure that you have achieved them? In other words, you are preaching accountability, and how would you apply that to yourself? Over.
Thank you, Professor Hogerzeil. I would invite Christine and then Jordan to respond a little bit.
So thank you so much, Professor Hogerzeil. I will start to answer some of your questions, and I think your concerns about being specific, it's extremely crucial. And I think, to be honest, in this this launch of our report, we as a Youth Commission have to be transparent about that in our work, as probably you have within Lancet Commission with great knowledge and expertise in it. Also, we have struggled with the fact that there are so many challenges, and then we have to come together and find something to agree upon. And I think being specific enough is something that can be a fair criticism of our work, but also by your questions, I think you're also throwing us in a direction that this is the next step. Though that being said, I also have to say that while we should take on that challenge, I also think it's important to recognize that this commission consists of 17 independent commissioners who have developed this report. We are hosting a series of webinars for implementation, or to provoke discussion about our implementation, and to one extent that is already something new, because usually when a commission delivers a report, there is a report. We want to keep that discussion going, exactly to be able to see where we go next on implementation and delivery and becoming more specific. At the same time, I don't think we have in our mandate or what we agreed upon as a Youth Commission to do, a role in making that happen at every level. And that's also why we are inviting everyone and the participants of this seminar in particular and our networks to play crucial roles in making the next steps happening. And I think that's also something we acknowledged in our work, or discovered in our work, that it is extremely important what happens next, but what we can do as a Youth Commission and 17 independent persons, we cannot solve everything, but in moving forward on that, yes, we should become more specific. And I think Jordan might give you some guidance on some of the specific aspects that we do touch upon in our answer. I wanted to just give you some thought on the accountability aspects. I'm very happy that you asked these questions, and as you say, it's what we all discuss, but how do we actually deliver on this buzzword that has become something that we all discuss in global health? I think youth as a stakeholder is a statement that we make because we think we should have a role to play. We're 40% of the youth, and they should have a role in decision making, not necessarily as a Youth Commission, but as young people getting involved in current processes and decision making. There should be our youth representatives on task force dealing with essential medicines. That can be one step for us to consider, because when we talk about youth involvement, it's often very fluffy and difficult to see what does this actually have to say. A lot of youth discussions becomes very much about having a person in the room, but what actually matters in our view is that youth voice are actually heard. When we bring out our 18 recommendations, we want those to be heard and acknowledged. So I think if we want to look at, do we deliver as a commission, we have to look 1 year ahead, or 2 years, or maybe 5 or 10 years on whether those recommendations were heard or not. But I think your question is very good, and probably as a Youth Commission we have to reflect more upon that. Will there be a scorecard, an EML implemented by an actor or institution? Will there be different tools set in place or in national processes? I think within our commission we should probably look into that, and I think having input from you on that is important, and I also invite the participants of this seminar to challenge us on that. And they, as far as I've understood from Sam and Jordan, it might also be an independent Youth Commission seminar on accountability that can deal with some of these issues.
Thank you, Christine. I think just to add a little bit, I think that's exactly why we need a position paper with the UN major group, because again, since the UN major group for children and youth mandated by the UN to engage young people, many a time young people are present in those high-level meetings, but they don't have, they might not have the exact idea to say. So I think it's very important that we have an open process of creating a position paper in which we make it very clear these are the changes that young people want to see, and this is how exactly we want to see in terms of how we obtain the changes. So Jordan or Shiva, do you have any more to add in response to Professor Hogerzeil's questions?
Yeah, very briefly, just on that comment, again, thank you for your questions. And when we set out to write these recommendations, what we wanted to do is make them as actionable as possible, and we really viewed this process as something that would continue, sort of starting with the report, but would continue to be carried on through us, as Christine mentioned, as independent commissioners. So we all have our roles within our respective institutions, and will continue to occupy different roles, I believe, within this space. And so, for example, the scorecard is really something we've been thinking about the implementation of. Briefly on the point of counterfeits, so some of the reason we didn't propose specific definitions also is knowing that this process is going on elsewhere, and this is already moving at the WHO level, as one of our commissioners was on this sort of panel at WHO. So, you know, I think, though, going forward, we do want to define that more closely, and that's why we're having these follow-up discussions.
Professor Hogerzeil, it seems like you want to respond very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly, because I know we are ending the end of the seminar. No, I think it's fine, and let me first sort of say, Christine, it was not at all intended as a criticism. On the contrary, I should have started with that the Youth Commission did very, very, very well and has achieved a lot. So all of you can, in that sense, rest and relax and be proud. So that's not the issue at all. It's more like thinking about the future, and you may want to consider, and you don't have to respond to that now, but it's in life. It's always you are working on something good, and you are committed to it, and at a certain moment you have to find a successor, and that's part of the game. And in this case, if we say that there's still so much work to be done and youth remains an important stakeholder, then maybe you have to think about who are going to succeed to you. You don't have to do all of it, and maybe the commission. So you may want to think about having commissions, but having them bound to a year. So this was the Youth Commission 2016. And you may want to think that some of you may stop and others may want to continue or start a Youth Commission 2017 or 18. So sort of hand over to people who had no chance now. So that commissions would be in itself time limited, but continue as a sort of institution for some years. So that is something you may want to, or you may say, well, that's going to be, why don't we in the end gang up now and absorb the Commission or the future work by the Commission with YCEMP or so. I mean, I leave that to you. But think about your handover and about your successor. And the last one, accountability. It's difficult. You can indeed say, well, before we accountability is not just only the outcome, the final outcome of something that has changed in the assembly or something. I think to make life a little easier for yourself, you can also have what we call intermediate outcomes or intermediate steps or outputs, something you do which is not yet an outcome, but making it concrete. We have had so many webinars, so many that, proposed a guideline here, attended meetings there. So make it concrete as what I say, as inputs or intermediate outputs that helps you to plan, and it's also good for reporting purposes. And in the long run, of course, you want to know what the real outcomes is. But that gets increasingly difficult because there's so many other players as well. It's difficult to link one specific outcome to one specific activity usually. You're part of a team.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much for participating, and I wish you all much good luck. You're doing tremendously good work. Over.
Thank you, Professor Hogerzeil. I think it's interesting about the point of finding successor and colleagues, I would say. Just to clarify a little bit, because not all of us are actually from Universities Alive for Essential Medicine, YCEMP, because the Youth Commission has come from a very diverse background, and not all of us are from YCEMP. So it's very interesting and important for us to reach out to all the networks that we have and to find more colleagues to work together. So that's a very important point and something that we need to keep in mind. So can I ask for any question or any comments? So because I do see a lot of people here who are either from around the world. So I just wonder if any of you would like to take the stage and sort of like to comment or ask questions. Let me just wait a little bit if you are trying to think of a question or trying to type through the chat box. And again, we have provided a link for all of you so that you can provide feedback and also leave your contact so that we can contact you directly for our next upcoming webinars, which will be on the individual recommendations that we presented. And the next one will be on essential medicine lists, which I assure you will be very interesting, especially if we delve into the history and how at the country level, we can ensure access. If no immediate questions, so I also look forward to your feedbacks and your contact. Thank you very much, and there are a lot of ways to keep in touch actually. So you please do follow us on our Facebook, on Twitter, and then to follow us on our website. And you can also contact us through emails. There's the contact information on our website as well. Really, I think as we pointed out, it's very important that we understand the reports are out, the 3 reports are out, but this is only really the beginning, and we want to see every one of us here to be able to do something together, across borders to really have a strong youth voice and with concrete ways and suggestions about how we can move forward. So you have heard about the 3 reports, and next webinar we will present on the individual recommendations, and we do hope to see you there. And thank you very much to all of you, and of course we need to acknowledge all the youth commissioners in the Lancet Youth Commission and all the commissioners in the Lancet Commission on Essential Medicine Policies for making this possible. And the recording of this webinar will be made available on our website. You can watch it again, or you can share with your friends and colleagues. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you in our next webinar. Have a good day.
you.